Hi everyone, this is the third and final installment of the Hanging Pawns series. This time we're going to look at some of the drawbacks that having hanging pawns can have if you don't develop an initiative to go with them. And the game we're going to use to illustrate that is Max U with the white pieces against Samuel Reshevsky, played in Zurich in 1953 at the Candidates Tournament, and they were both top level players of their day, and it's a good game in itself. So it opened with a Nimzo Indian after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3 and bishop b4. And then came some fairly routine developing moves with e3, c5, bishop d3, black castled, a3, bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3, b6, knight e2 and bishop b7. And already we can see that this pawn structure may result in the hanging pawns formation after some exchanges, and that's what happens in a few moves time. After u castled, and then d6, queen c2 and d5, which seems strange to play after having played d6 the move before. But the point is that white's last move with queen c2 was relatively passive, and Reshevsky was probably expecting the more active knight g3 and then f3, e4, etc. But after you played queen c2, Reshevsky's noted that it now suits him much better to play d5, as the white queen will be poorly placed in the game that's likely to follow, and he's right in that analysis. So then came c takes d5, queen takes d5, knight f4, queen c6, c4, and c takes d4. And if instead at this stage g5, because it's hoping to win the knight here, because if the knight moves then it's mate on g2. But here white could have played the Zwischenzug d5, which favours him strongly, and black has weakened his kingside badly. Play might continue here, for example, e takes d5 and knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes h7 check, king h8 and bishop e4, with a large advantage for white. So Reshevsky avoided that, and he played c takes d4 instead. And then came e takes d4, and again the hanging pawns have emerged, but this time they're not so much of an advantage, and it's mainly because white's other pieces are slightly misplaced. This knight, for example, on f4 in particular is not well placed to suit the dynamics of the hanging pawns, and also the queen and the bishop aimed on this long diagonal are restricting the maneuverability of the other pieces. Although all things considered though, at the same time black still has to take care in the position, and Reshevsky now develops his pieces carefully to stop any kind of attacking threats or chances that white could have in this situation. First he played knight b to d7, then came bishop b2, rook fe8, and the rooks mirror each other on the e and c files. And then knight f8, rerouting the knight to the king side, which is going to stop any threats on the h7 pawn. And in this position now, black's queen is much better placed than white's queen here on c6 and in comparison with the queen on c2. It's important to note here, like say for example, if d5 is played here, which is the classic breakthrough move with hanging pawns, after e takes d5, if this bishop takes the knight here, then the queen can recapture, and that's a very useful resource to have, because if it was forced if the g pawn was forced to recapture, then it would be a bad weakening of the king side. And the queen is just more involved in the game and more central and more active than white's queen. So it's much better where it is than white's queen. And and then bishop f1 was played by you. So it's just trying to eliminate any tactics down the long diagonal by overprotecting g2 here. And then came knight g6 and knight takes g6, which probably wasn't the right decision, simply because exchanges in positions like this tend to favour the defender, and Yu was probably starting to feel that his position wasn't good and that his hanging pawns were becoming a weakness. A better move in this situation was knight d3, but even then, excuse me, his pieces still remain poorly placed to make the hanging pawns an effective weapon. But anyway, the game was knight takes g6, and then came h takes g6, rook e3, which is a rook lift aimed at taking control of the open h file. But realistically, there are no dangerous threats here, and Reshevsky is fairly quick to take the initiative because of his better placed pieces. So rook e d8, queen e2, queen d6, rook h3, queen f4, rook d1, bishop a6, and suddenly there's a lot of pressure bearing down on the hanging pawns. Rook f3, queen e4, and exchanging queens here would favour black, as then white would have even fewer attacking chances, and the hanging pawns would become even more of a static weakness and target. So rook e3, queen g4, again offering the exchange of queens, f3, queen f4, g3, because the queen could be a bad irritation on f4, so you play g3 to get rid of it, but it's a bad weakening move. And the main thing to recognize here is that white has no plan and no constructive way to continue. His pieces aren't working well together at all, and black's on the other hand are well placed and efficient, all doing a good job, and it's notoriously difficult not to make weakening moves in a situation such as white's here, who is completely passive. So queen h6, after having provoked weaknesses, the queen retreats to still a good square. And rook c3, queen g5, queen f2, rook d7, and white is completely passive, so Reshevsky has the time to double his rooks easily and bring even more pressure onto the c4 pawn. Rook dc1, rook d7, rook 1 c2, queen a5, and bishop c1, which was a blunder and most likely brought on by the passivity and pressure on his position. But in any case, it's clear that his hanging pawns were proving a liability rather than an asset. So Reshevsky now played knight d5, and he's winning. If the rook moves, then the c-pawn is falling, and you decided to sacrifice the exchange with c takes d5. But after rook takes c3, rook takes c3, queen takes c3, his position is still hopeless. He tried bishop b2, and then came queen b3, bishop takes a6, and it seems that white has two pieces for the rook. But then comes rook c2, and the game is completely lost, especially after d6 is played, because then of course rook takes f2, d7, queen d5, king takes f2, and makes you resign. So it was a great game from Reshevsky and a great example of how to play against hanging pawns. Hope you enjoyed that. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.